is being able to put elements side by side, specifically buttons. For example, these buttons right here, we have Count Me In and Watch Now, and they're top to bottom, they're stacked above each other, which has been the way Elementor does it for a long time. Other page builders like Brizzy will allow you to put them side by side. Using custom CSS, you can put them side by side. Now with Elementor 2.5, you can put them side by side without CSS. So click on any one of these, go to the Advanced tab, go to Custom Positioning, change the width from default to inline. Do that for the second element as well. And now they're side by side. Might want to change the padding or the margin. Let's change the margin on this first one so we have some space between the two. Margin right, let's unlock this. Margin right of 30 pixels. Now we have some space, we have buttons side by side, which is pretty awesome. If you try this and your element has a constrained width, you may need to change the padding within these elements. For example, if this button, because buttons all often have padding, so if the padding in this button is just too big. So if we go to the style inside the button, if this was, say, 60, and 60 on each side, then it's too wide. And now we're stacked again because the Watch Now does not fit in this area. So you may have to change the padding of your buttons to make that work, but either way, you're gonna have buttons side by side. The next thing is absolute positioning. If you read Elementor's release notes, they'll say this stuff is never possible before in WordPress. It's not entirely true. This has always been possible with CSS and JavaScript. It's just taken some work to do the custom written CSS and JavaScript. Whereas now you can do it in Page Builder, point and click. You can absolutely position things wherever you want on the page outside of the grid. And the grid is what websites use and web developers and web designers use to make things responsive. When you move outside of the grid, responsiveness becomes trickier, and so it's not recommended you do it very often. But you can go to any element, go to Edit It, go to Advanced, go to Custom Positioning again, change the position from default to absolute, and now you can drag it around wherever you want it. So let's just put it right up here. The width changes because it's outside of its area, but you can just drag and drop, or drag it, make it bigger. And now we have our element up here. You'll notice we used to have to put things, we drag them into a spot, we get that blue line, and we drop it there, that's where it'd go, inside the grid. With absolute positioning, you can put it wherever you want, which is pretty awesome. The bad thing is this absolute positioning can break responsiveness. So if we switch to mobile, let's just go to mobile here, we see the element's not there. Okay, where'd it go? Well, we can now scroll horizontally, which we don't want. That's bad experience for users. But it happens because of this absolute positioning. It happens because of the content on the page is wider than the page itself, and absolute positioning is outside of the responsiveness, so we have to scroll horizontally. But we can move it on mobile to wherever we want. There's not much space here. I'm just going to move it right there. It's a terrible spot. But at least now, our mobile doesn't scroll horizontally. We can't go to the side anymore. Now if we switch back to desktop, it's still over here on desktop. And so when you absolute position things, make sure you absolutely position them in mobile and tablets, or hide them in mobile and tablets, depending what your needs are. But make sure you address that, otherwise there's going to be a horizontal scroll and a lot of white space on the side, which is not great for user experience. The next thing is fixed positioning. So if we choose any one of these, let's choose this one, change our position under Advanced Custom Positioning, change it to Fixed. And now we drag it around, let's put it down here. Now we have this button down here that follows us down the page. You can put it wherever you want. Usually it's best to put it on the side somewhere so it's not scrolling right down the middle of the content. But this follows everybody down the page and it adjusts based on the viewer's viewport. This is different from stickiness. Stickiness is if you had this section being sticky right here, the strength and stamina. Once you get to this point, it would then follow you down the page. Then you'd have to use some z-index if you want to come all the way down to have it above other elements that are below it and things of that nature. Whereas this fixed position is not relative to a section, it's relative to the user's viewport, and it just follows down the page for the entire website. You don't have to do any z-indexing, anything like that, just fix it using those settings. Let's just go there, Advanced, Custom Positioning, and then where'd it go? Position fixed. That's all you need to make it follow down the page. Now let's go to the very bottom of the page, and I have a bunch of buttons that I put into a single column. This has to be inside of a column for it to work, and these are all just the same button I duplicated, just for sake of this example. Now if we click on the column, under layout, we have the ability to change the horizontal align option. We change it from default to start, center, end. That's what we had before. So let's see what those are. Start is just like this. Center, everything is centered. End, everything is pushed to the far side. Now the new options we have are space between, space around, and space evenly. So space between puts the two starting, or the starting button and the end button, right to the very edge of the element, and then it divides the space in between equally and spaces the buttons out. So this gap, this gap, this gap, and this gap are all the same. Now space around, it's similar, but not quite the same. So we have the start button and the end button indented a little bit, and the space between each one is the same, but the space on the ends is half of the space in between. So this space between each button is the same, then the space at the edge between the end button and the end and the start button and the beginning is half of the width of the space in between. Now space evenly has the same space everywhere, so space at the beginning and in between the buttons is all the same, and if you set this up, then you delete a button, it then adjusts to the new space available, and now we can horizontally align buttons, which is important because now that we can put buttons side by side or elements side by side, we need to be able to space them evenly using this horizontal align. The vertical align option, which we can do for vertically spaced elements. So if we click on the column, we change the vertical align. We have the 3 options or the 4 options I had before, then the space between, space around, space evenly. That work the same way as the horizontal options, just now they're vertical. If we choose space between, nothing changed because these elements actually take up the whole space. So if we delete, let's just delete 2 of these. And now when we choose space between, nothing changed because we saw it happening as it goes, but if we choose space around, we see the spacing changes, and then space evenly also changes. Space between the original ones like this, and then we have the top, middle, and bottom as always. And that allows us to space things more creatively and more succinctly using the vertical alignment options for elements. And that has to, again, be inside of a column. The last layout feature that was added in this update is the ability to add columns to text. So we have this piece of text here. If we click on it, it's just a regular text editor widget, but we now have the columns option here. So we can change it from 1 column to 2 columns. This is not the same as adding columns like you have here, where you have these column icons. It's not the same as that. It's adding columns to the text itself. It only works in the text widget. So you can have your layouts look more like newspapers, or your blog posts look like newspapers if you want to. You can change it to as many columns as makes sense. 5 in this case is too many, doesn't look quite right, but I'm going to keep it anyway. You can change the column gap, the space between the columns. Those are the 2 options for creating those columns, and you can make pretty neat little looking layouts, or even just have elements inside of a post or a page that have the columns instead of having everything have a column. Either way, you'll figure it out, but the point is, this is a new feature in this update. Another new feature, let's go to the very top, is remembering where you left off in a tab. So if we go to this one, we haven't worked on this one yet today, so if I just click on here, it goes to content. And this is where it always went in the previous versions of Elementor. Any element you've worked on a page, worked on it or not worked on it, it goes to this spot every time. Now if we change it to, let's go to advanced, go to border. So now in the advanced tab, have the border open. Now let's go to this one. We haven't worked on this one either. So it starts in the content. Now if we go back to this one, it remembers where we were. It starts in advanced and border. So that's new in this version. The last thing that's new is speed improvements. I haven't tested it, but apparently the speed is improved by 50% inside of the builder. So when you're loading the builder in your website, when you're moving between menus, between elements, things will load 50% faster than they did before. This does not affect loading on the front end as far as I know. Like I said, I haven't tested it yet, but Elementor says loading has improved by 50% inside the builder, and that just makes working with it faster, more fun, more entertaining, and easier. And those are all the updates in version 2.5. If you haven't updated yet, make sure you do, and make sure you back up your site first, because you never know what will go wrong with these updates. Updates can break things, so make sure